There is a global debate around the gig economy. A simple question sits at the center of it. Are platform workers employees or independent contractors? For clarity, an employee is someone who works under the direction and control of another, often with set hours, regular pay, and benefits. An independent contractor, on the other hand, operates their own business, controls when and how work is done, bears their own costs, and generally does not receive the benefits associated with employment. In the Nigerian class action case of Daniel John and another versus Uber and Taxify, now Bolt, a group of ride-hailing drivers approached the National Industrial Court asking to be recognized as employees of the platforms they worked with. They sought declarations that they were entitled to benefits such as pensions, health insurance, and that the companies should bear responsibility for their actions while on duty. Their position was built on how the work operated in practice. They explained that they were brought into the system through a form of onboarding. They pointed to requirements set by the platforms, not only on the condition of their vehicles, but also on how the service was delivered. Fares were determined by the platform, payments were processed centrally, and what they received came in regular intervals. To them, this reflected a structured working relationship, closer to employment than independent enterprise. At Legalify attorneys, this kind of argument is familiar. It is rarely framed around labels alone, but around patterns, control, dependency, and the degree to which discretion is real or only apparent. These are not always obvious from the contract itself. The companies, however, returned to the contract. The agreements entered into electronically made it clear, in their view, that the relationship was one of independent contracting. The drivers used their own vehicles, covered their own costs, and chose when to work. There were no fixed hours, no obligation to accept requests, and no restriction from working with competing platforms. The companies described themselves as technology providers, connecting riders to independent service providers, not employers directing a workforce. Both positions drew from the same arrangement, but each told a different story about what that arrangement meant in law. The expectation was that the court would weigh these arguments and provide clarity. It did not. The case was dismissed before the court could determine whether the drivers were employees or not. The decision turned on how the claim was presented. The process adopted assumed that the material facts were not in dispute, but the court found that they were. There were clear disagreements on the nature of the relationship, on control, on payment structure, and on obligations. That alone made the procedure unsuitable for resolving the issues placed before the court. There was also a gap between the claims made and the materials provided at the outset. Assertions about control, payment, and working conditions were not supported with documents in the initial filings. The court was left with statements that were not anchored in evidence at the stage they were first introduced. When supporting materials later appeared, they came at a point where the opposing parties did not have a fair opportunity to respond. The court took the view that this approach could not form a proper basis for adjudication. In effect, the record before the court was incomplete. On that basis, the case was treated as one that could not be determined in its current form. The central question, the one that drew attention to the case in the first place, remained unanswered. That outcome carries its own weight. It shows how a matter of significant commercial and policy importance can turn on structure and sequence. It also leaves open a wider issue. The gap between contractual terms and operational reality remains. Where one side sees flexibility and independence, another may see coordination and control. That tension is not limited to ride-hailing. It appears across sectors where services are delivered through platforms, networks, and layered arrangements. At Legalify attorneys, our experience across similar matters shows that these cases often hinge on early decisions. How the relationship is documented, how evidence is preserved, and how a claim is structured tend to shape the eventual outcome. The judgment in the case does not resolve the classification question. It simply shows that before the law answers it, the facts must be properly placed before it with the right evidence. And so the issue of employee or independent contractor still lingers and subsists.